Welcome back to Jack and Rex Tales. Rex was still awake. Every other living soul inside that steel-arched shelter had finally surrendered to exhaustion. 27 people collapsed against walls and bags and each other. Children curled into their mothers. Old men with their chins dropped to their chests. The broken sleep of people who have been terrified for hours and have nothing left. The storm was still screaming outside. The walls were still shuddering, but inside, in the dim orange glow of 2 lanterns, the breathing had finally slowed. Rex was still awake. He moved through the shelter the way he had moved through every dangerous place he had ever been, quietly, deliberately, missing nothing. His bad leg rolled beneath him with each step, but his movement was steady and purposeful. He passed the sleeping children. He passed the old man whose breathing had finally settled. He passed the man who had laughed 3 weeks ago, now sleeping against the cold steel wall with the exhaustion of someone who had been humbled completely. Rex stopped at the entrance. He stood there, facing the door, facing the storm, facing whatever waited on the other side of that steel, and he did not move. At the back of the shelter, Jack Thompson sat against the wall with his eyes open, watching his dog, watching him stand watch. And in that moment, with 27 lives breathing softly around them, Jack felt something move through his chest that was too large and too old for any word he knew. He closed his eyes. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he slept. 6 weeks earlier, Jack Thompson had stepped off a Greyhound bus into Timberline Valley, Montana, with a worn duffel bag over one shoulder and Rex walking quietly at his left side. No one came to meet them. The bus pulled away and left them standing at the edge of a small town that had been slowly losing things for 30 years and had developed, the way such towns do, a deep suspicion of anything it didn't already recognize. Jack was 50 years old. His beard was rough and salted with gray. His hands were large and scarred. His eyes moved the way combat veterans' eyes move, scanning, assessing, never fully at rest. 22 years as a United States Navy SEAL had made stillness into a different kind of attention. He didn't tell anyone about the SEAL part. Rex walked beside him into the general store, and the man behind the counter, Dale Pruitt, born and raised in Timberline Valley, who considered this a form of authority, watched them both with the expression of someone who had already decided what he thought. "You the feller that bought the Haggerty property?" Dale asked. Jack set his items on the counter. "That's right." "Nobody builds on that ridge," Dale said. Jack looked at him evenly. "Seems like a good reason, too." He paid and walked back out into the cold, leaving Dale Pruitt with the expression of a man unaccustomed to not getting the last word. The Haggerty property on North Cliff Ridge was exactly as advertised. 3 previous structures had been attempted there over the decades. 3 had been destroyed, methodically, progressively, by wind that came off the northern peaks at angles engineered to find weakness. Collapsed beams, rusted iron, a door frame standing alone with nothing around it, like a monument to everyone who had tried and walked away. Jack walked the perimeter slowly, Rex beside him, both of them reading the land the way they had learned to read territory, looking not at what was there, but at what the place was telling them. He knelt and pressed his palm flat to the frozen ground, held it there. "Yeah," he said quietly, to Rex, to no one. "This'll hold." Rex's ears came forward once and settled. What Jack built over the following 3 weeks looked like nothing else in the valley. An arch, curved steel, low to the ground, rounded at the top, no sharp angles, no flat surfaces for wind to press against and exploit. A design that came not from textbooks, but from years of learning what survives in hostile places, what sheds force instead of absorbing it. It looked strange, and in small towns, strange is an invitation. Dale Pruitt came twice just to laugh. "Hey, SEAL," he called up the ridge one afternoon, grinning for his audience. "Building a bunker or hiding from the government?" The men behind him laughed. Jack looked up, looked at Dale for one steady moment, went back to work. There were mornings so cold the metal stuck to his gloves, evenings when the wind came off the peaks with such force that standing upright required effort. His knuckles split, and he rapped them and continued. The arch grew slowly, curved and strange, and exactly as he intended. Rex was always there. On the hard evenings, Jack would sit against the frame with Rex pressed against his left side, always his left side, always close, and sometimes, in the silence, he would talk. Not for answers, in the way soldiers talk when the only witness who matters is the one who was actually there. "You remember Helmand?" he said one night, his hand moving slowly through Rex's fur. Rex's ears came forward. "Building came down so fast." Jack was quiet for a moment. "I didn't even know I was under it until I couldn't breathe, couldn't see anything, just weight and smoke." His hand stilled. "And then I heard you, digging, just digging." Rex turned and looked at him, those amber eyes holding something too precise to be instinct and too wordless to be understanding, but somewhere true between the two. "You didn't stop," Jack said. "Everybody else was gone, and you didn't stop." Rex pressed the full weight of his head against Jack's chest. Jack's arm came around him slowly. They sat like that on the frozen ridge, two old soldiers who had survived things that should have killed them, holding on to each other in the particular silence of those who have nothing left to prove. The blizzard came on a Thursday night in November without the warning the Weather Service had promised. The system deepened faster than any model predicted, pulling Arctic air down from Canada with a violence that transformed a moderate forecast into something the valley would spend decades describing. Power died at 7:14 in the evening, all at once. The valley went from lit to dark, like a switch thrown by something that meant it. By 9 o'clock, the wind was past 80 miles an hour. Houses began to fail. A roof on Sycamore Lane peeled back clean as paper. Two homes on the north end lost walls entirely. Families stood inside their own houses and understood with sudden, terrible clarity that the buildings around them were no longer on their side. Tom Calloway stood on the remains of his porch on Miller Street with his 8-year-old daughter Gracie pressed hard against his ribs. His flashlight was useless against the white wall of the storm. Behind him, his wife Karen had her hand flat against his back. The house was shuddering in a way houses are not supposed to shudder. He turned the flashlight off, stood in the dark, then said it quietly, almost to himself. The ridge. Karen was still. The shelter on the ridge. 3 days ago, he had driven up there with Dale Pruitt and laughed. He remembered it now with a shame that sat in him like something swallowed wrong. They were not the only ones doing this calculation. All across the valley, in the dark, people were arriving at the same desperate arithmetic. Their homes were failing. The roads were buried. There was exactly one structure in Timberline Valley built specifically for this, built by a man they had mocked, on a ridge everyone said was cursed, using a design everyone called foolish. They came up the ridge in ones and twos and small, frightened groups, leaning into the wind, some carrying children, some supporting parents, some arriving with nothing but their coats and the expression of people who have understood something important too late and are praying it is not too late. Jack opened the door the first time at 9:23 in the evening. Tom Calloway stood in the storm with Gracie buried against his chest, her small fists locked in his jacket. The wind was so loud that whatever Tom had planned to say was gone, torn away, and what remained was just his face, open and ashamed and frightened, and Gracie's eyes looking at Jack over her father's shoulder. Jack looked at them for one moment, stepped back from the door. "Get inside," he said. They kept coming. The Hendersons, with their 3 children and an elderly mother who arrived without her coat because there had been no time. The Garcias, the Whitmore couple, Mr. Whitmore bleeding above his eye. Dale Pruitt arrived at 11 o'clock with his wife and her sister and walked through the door without looking at Jack and found a place along the wall and sat down with his eyes fixed on the floor between his boots. Jack said nothing. 27 people. The shelter received them all without complaint. The curved steel gave the wind nothing to hold. Snow slid from the rounded roof in slow sheets instead of accumulating into weight. The structure didn't fight the storm. It simply declined to be broken by it. Inside, people sat close in the dim lantern light and listened to the storm try to find a way through walls that would not give. A little girl, the youngest Garcia child, maybe 5 years old, began to cry. The quiet, exhausted kind, the kind that comes when a child has been frightened so long the fear has nowhere left to go but out. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, crying softly, and the sound she made changed the room, made the fear human, made it impossible to pretend the night was not as serious as it was. Rex crossed the shelter. No one asked him to. He simply rose and moved through the crowded space with quiet purpose, navigating bodies and bags and outstretched legs with the careful attention of someone who has assessed the room completely and knows exactly where he is needed. He stopped in front of the little girl. He looked at her for a moment. Then he lowered himself to the floor in front of her, slowly, carefully, with the deliberate patience of old joints that remember what they used to do, and laid his great heavy head in her lap. The crying paused. Her hands came down the way children's hands always come down to dogs, without decision, without thought, finding the warm fur behind his ears, her small fingers pressing in and then holding. Rex's eyes closed halfway. He did not move. He simply stayed, warm and solid and completely present, offering the one thing that required nothing but the willingness to remain. The crying stopped. Her mother sat beside her with both hands pressed over her mouth, watching this, her own eyes full. Rex moved through the shelter 2 more times that night. He found the ones closest to breaking, the old man whose breathing had become fast and panicked, who felt Rex's weight settle against his legs and slowly, without knowing why, began to breathe again. The teenage boy sitting rigid in the corner, shaking with the effort of hiding it, who felt a warm nose press against the back of his hand and looked down into amber eyes that held no judgment whatsoever, and felt something loosen in his chest like a knot finally releasing. At 2 in the morning, the storm delivered its worst, a gust so violent the entire structure resonated, a deep, sustained vibration that moved through the steel and the floor and into the bodies of everyone inside. Someone gasped. A whisper from the back, "Is it going to hold?" Every face turned to Jack. He stood at the entrance where he had stood all night, still and straight, Rex beside him, the man and his dog at the door of the thing they had built together, steady and certain and immovable. Jack turned and looked at the room, at 27 frightened faces looking back at him like he was the last solid thing in the world. His voice was quiet, just quiet, the way certainty is quiet when it has nothing left to prove. "It will hold," he said. It held. Dawn came slowly, pale gray at the windows first, then gradually, gently, the unmistakable lightning that means the darkness is actually ending. Jack opened the door. The valley below was transformed, white and absolute, the familiar shapes of the town softened and buried, roads gone, fences gone, the ordinary geography replaced by something that looked like a place before people had arrived to name it. 27 people filed out and stood in the cold morning air and looked at what the storm had done. Each of them knew, in their own private way, what it meant that they were standing here to look at it. Rescue teams arrived by mid-morning expecting the worst. What they found on North Cliff Ridge recalibrated something in every one of them. 27 survivors, no structural damage, a steel arch that looked as though the storm had simply passed around it and moved on. The team leader, a man named Paul, 15 Montana winters behind him, walked slowly around the shelter with his gloved hand trailing along the curved steel. He stopped in front of Jack. "You built this yourself?" "Yes," Jack said. Paul gave him the slow, deep nod of a man who understands some things cannot be addressed with words. Then he walked away. Dale Pruitt found Jack later that morning at the eastern edge of the ridge, standing alone with Rex at his feet, looking out over the damaged valley. Dale came and stood beside him, and they were quiet together for a while, which was its own kind of conversation. "I was wrong," Dale said finally. Jack was quiet a moment. "I know." Dale looked at his boots. "Will you teach me how to build it?" Jack turned and looked at him, fully, without hurry, and whatever he found there was enough. "Yeah," he said, "I'll teach you." He did. Through that winter and the next, Jack answered every question patiently and honestly, as a man teaches who has learned things through genuine cost and understands that knowledge kept is knowledge wasted. More arch shelters rose across the valley. The ridge everyone had called cursed became the ridge people pointed to when they talked about what Timberline Valley had learned about itself. Rex aged through those seasons with the quiet grace of soldiers who have earned the right to slow down. His leg was worse in the cold. He slept longer. But his eyes were still clear, and when Jack moved, Rex moved. Without decision, without hesitation, the way water moves in the direction it has always moved. On a Thursday morning in late January, 14 months after the night of the blizzard, Jack was sitting outside the shelter in the early light with a cup of coffee when Rex walked to the entrance and lay down. Not the way he lay down when he was tired, the other way. Jack set his cup down. He walked to Rex and lowered himself to the ground and put his hand in the thick, warm fur behind his jaw, the place Rex had always liked best, and he stayed. Rex's chest rose and fell slowly. His amber eyes were open, looking out over the valley, the same valley he had watched all through that long, terrible night from this exact spot, standing guard over sleeping people who did not know they were being watched over. The morning was still, cold, quiet. "Hey," Jack said, barely above a whisper. "You did good, partner." His hand moved slowly through the fur. "You did real good." Rex's breathing had become something else now, slower, more widely spaced, the way breathing becomes when the distance between each breath is no longer something to take for granted. "You pulled me out of that building," Jack said. His jaw was tight. His eyes were clear, but only just. "You stayed right here, every single day." He exhaled. "I wouldn't have built any of this without you. You know that." Rex turned his head, very slightly, and found Jack's face. Those amber eyes, patient and clear, and full of something that had no name, but that Jack had been grateful for every single day of the last 9 years. Jack looked back at him and did not look away. "I've got it from here," he said softly. "You rest now. You've done enough." Rex held his gaze for one long, quiet moment, and then, gently, with all the grace and dignity that had defined every day of his life, he closed his eyes. His chest stilled. Jack did not move. He sat with his hand on Rex's neck in the cold January morning, and he did not move for a very long time. Below him, the valley was waking, smoke rising from chimneys, the quiet sounds of ordinary morning in a place that would never again be ordinary in the ways that mattered most. He became aware of them gradually. He didn't hear them come, but at some point he understood that he was not alone, that behind him, in the cold, the people of Timberline Valley had come. Tom Calloway, Gracie standing very still with her hands folded, Dale Pruitt with his hat pressed to his chest, the Garcia family, the old man whose breathing Rex had steadied through the worst of the storm, the teenage boy from the corner, all of them. No one spoke. Some things are too large for speaking. They buried Rex at the entrance to the shelter, where he had lain down, where he had stood watch, where he had done his last and finest work. A simple stone marker was placed, and the words on it were plain, because plain was all that was needed. Rex. He protected what others couldn't save. Jack stood at the marker after the others had gone. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked out at the valley, at the arch shelters rising across the landscape, at the place that was better and stronger and more itself because of what one man and one dog had refused to stop building. He looked back at the marker. "I've got it," he said quietly, and he turned and went back to work. Because that is what purpose looks like when it is real. It does not require an audience. It does not stop when the hardest thing happens. It just continues, patient and steady, the way Rex continued, the way Jack continued, the way anything built with honest hands and a whole heart continues long after the storm has passed and the morning has come and the valley is still standing. If this story reached something in you tonight, if it reminded you of someone whose loyalty asked for nothing, or someone who kept building while the world laughed, or someone who opened a door in the dark and said, "Get inside," without a moment of hesitation, then you already understand what Jack and Rex Tales is here for. We come back every week to these stories, the ones about people who showed up quietly and stayed, about the dogs who never left, about the veterans carrying invisible weight who find their purpose in forgotten valleys, about the truth that real courage is not loud, real loyalty is not conditional, and real kindness does not keep a record. Subscribe to Jack and Rex Tales, because these stories matter, because the people in them deserve to be remembered, and because somewhere right now there is someone building something on a ridge the whole town says is cursed, and they need to know that what they are building will hold. It will hold. We'll see you in the next one.